This video will be about compound interest. So you would remember us talking about compound interest when we were looking at the exponential formula. So remember how I talked about borrowing, I think, off Hamish, $600,000, and we looked at how much I'd owe him in interest over time. So you remember that when we are talking about growth, we use a plus, and decay we use a minus. This formula you would have typed into your calculator a couple of times, where we have the interest amount expressed with this, multiplied by the initial borrowed amount will give us our overall total that we either that we owe or that we have decayed. So we're revisiting it again now, where some of the variables are just slightly different. So instead of using A0, we use P for principal amount, which is the initial amount that we've borrowed. You remember that from us doing simple interest before. And instead of using N, we use T for time. So for example, if I were to borrow $100 at 5% interest per annum, then the first year out, if it was simple interest, I'd owe $105. It was 5% and $10 of $100. In the second year, I'd owe $110 because there's another $5 in addition after the in the second year. Now the third year, I'd owe another $5, so it's $115. So that 5% was always based on the initial $100 that I borrowed. With compound interest, after that first year, it's $105 I owe. Then in the second year, this is where it gets different. The 5% is calculated based on what's owed at the end of the first year. So that's 5% of 105. And in the third year, it'll be 5% of the amount that we owed at the end of the second year. So that interest would be $5.25. So if we add it back on, our total amount owed now would be 105 plus 5.25, which is $110.25. 25 cents more than if we were doing simple interest. Now in the third year, it will be 5% times 110.25, which is the final amount in the second year, which would give 5.5125. So my final amount is 110.25, which is what I owe at the end of the second year, plus that interest, which would equal $115.76. You can see it only is slightly more than if we were doing simple interest. Now, if you didn't follow this whole procedure of me calculating compound interest, not to worry. Maths tends to have simplified ways of doing things when we are dealing with formulas. So next to this, I'll write a little note that says A is the amount owed at the end of T years. T is the time, P is initial amount borrowed, and we know that R is the percentage rate per annum normally. Now, if you just want the interest earned, you take A from this formula and you minus P. So say I want the interest earned from, if my final investment amount is $1,100 and the original amount I invested was $1,000, then my interest would just be 1100 take away 1,000, because this is the amount that I earned from the investment and this is the amount that I invested in it. So that includes the original $1,000, which means my interest would just be 100. That's essentially what this formula is saying. You would have seen it before. I'm going to rub this out just so that it becomes neater. Now let's do this worked example here. Determine to the nearest dollar the amount of money accumulated after 3 years if $2,000 is invested at an interest rate of 8% per annum compounded annually. Determine the amount of interest earned. Well, write down that formula. I'm going to zoom out so I can copy it. So my formula is A equals P bracket 1 plus R over 100 times T. Write down what we know. So after 3 years, so that's T, $2,000 is invested. That's my P. And R is 8% per annum. What we're finding then is A, because that's the only thing that we haven't been able to label. So A equals P, 2,000, times 1 plus R, which is 8. Remember, because we divide by 100, we don't put the percent into the calculator or write it down there, because dividing by 100 is saying percent to the power of T, which is 3. Okay, therefore, when we type that into our calculator, it'll give us 2,000 bracket 1 plus 8 over 100. Whoops. To the power of 3. That gives us 2519.424. Now for B, so I invested $2,000 for 3 years at 8% per annum. By the end of the 3 years, you have $2,519.424. The answer has asked for the nearest dollar, so we put 2519. Nearest dollar. To determine the interest earned, we will be using this formula. So the interest equals to, A minus P. A is there, 2519, minus the principal, which was $2,000. So I is equal to, if you use your calculator, $519. Now we'll do this one in the same way, where we have determined to the nearest dollar the amount of money owed after 2 years if we borrowed 10 grand at an interest rate of 10% per annum compounded annually. Again, we have this formula. 2 years is the time, $10,000 is P, and the rate is 10%. So A is P, which is 10,000, bracket 1 plus 10 over 100 to the power of T. And if we type that into our calculator, it'll give us 100 and, let's expand that, $12,100. And again, the interest, I is equal to A minus P, using this formula here. So I is equal to 12,100, which is A, take away P. That's done. Note that writing down what T, P, and R is in the question, labeling it, helps so much when we are substituting it, because we not only use it in part A, we ended up using it in part B as well, and all we have to do is locate A and P. Now you are good to complete questions 1 to 6. I will show you how to do this in your calculator when I return to class.